The average person calls 911 twice in their lifetime. What crazy thing happened that made you call? Watched a guy have a heart attack right in front of me mid-conversation at work. He didn't make it. We saw an agitated guy run out onto a 4-lane street, throw himself down and roll on the ground. Called 911 to get him off the street and whatever help he needed. Turned out some ass taxi driver pepper sprayed him in the eye when he tried to get directions from him. Taxi driver said he was on break, so he didn't want to be disturbed while parked at the fricking train station. The guy was completely blind and unaware he'd run onto the street. Also scared, wary of anyone approaching him because he couldn't establish whether we were there to help or continue the attack. Probably would have been fine to call the non-emergency line in retrospect. But we only found all of this out after the police and the ambulance had arrived. Was driving between Prince George and McBride a few years back and, on a twisty bit of road, saw a plume of smoke deep in the bush. Rang the wildfire hotline at the next mile marker and drove on. Once we got home, we get a phone call saying a chopper had been dispatched. Found a baby fire trying to get big, and was able to put it out. The child in me is still excited that I made a phone call and got a helicopter launched. I'm above average, I guess. An uncle had a stroke while visiting. Was a passenger in the car while the driver had a seizure, luckily while at a stop sign. So we just rolled through an intersection into a pole. At like 5 miles per hour. Witnessed a bicyclist get nailed by a vehicle. Witnessed a shark attack. My aunt was unconscious. 911 told me I was lying as my voice was still so soft when I was 18 and they thought I was a child and they asked for my aunt to come to the phone. Good thing my grandma came back from the shop and called for help. Bomb threat on public transport. Crazy dude going completely psycho. Also on public transport. Saw an old man get boned in an intersection I was walking parallel to. His door got wedged shut, and he was bleeding badly by the time I got to him. Called 911 and they ended up using the jaws of life to open his car up like a tuna can. Mofo ran a stop sign and hit me head on without touching the brakes. Later said it was my fault because I was in the way. I'm quite above the average. 2 robberies. 3 or 4 for a client pulling a peg tube out. 2 for clients that have fainted. And 2 for car accidents that I witnessed and had injured people. A drunken woman made a right turn in front of me. We were in straight road, no intersection. And I was in the rightmost lane. She turned right and kept going right. She overturned her car. So I stopped. And walked back to the accident while calling 911. I didn't call 911. But the only situation that really meets the requirements was that time in high school when I got up early to go to before school baseball practice. After practice I came home to shower, change clothes, and I noticed the house smelled kinda weird. Like a propane gas type smell. I went to tell my parents I thought something smelled weird. Went to their bedroom and only my mom was in there. Told her. We came downstairs and coincidentally my dad was coming up from the basement at the same time. Except he sorta passed out and fell on the stairs. My mom freaked out and called an ambulance. Long story short, we lived in a super old house, built in the 1920s, and something went wrong with the furnace in the basement, and that morning the house had slowly been filling up with carbon monoxide. My dad, having been in the basement watching TV that early morning, suffered the brunt of it. I just happened to notice the smell because I left and came back and noticed the contrast. Unlike the rest of my family who'd been slowly exposed to it and didn't notice. Everyone is fine. This was like 20 plus years ago. My dad is still alive and well. We've always had carbon monoxide alarms in our houses ever since. I do wonder though, if it had been a weekend, and I didn't need to get up super early to go to practice, if we'd have all just slept in and never woke up. A naked 30-year-old guy wrestling a clothed 50-year-old neighbor in front of my house. Turns out the naked guy was abusing his girlfriend and the older guy was their live-in landlord. Once I called the cops, the 30-year-old guy ran back into their house and the crying girlfriend went out on the second floor balcony. Fearing for her safety, I went into the house with one of my other neighbors. I was 36. He was late 40s. Barefoot with my arms extended in guard. I slowly walked in and up the stairs waiting for this guy to jump out at me. As I got to the top of the stairs, I see the bathroom window open and the police come rushing in. The guy got away for a few hours running between the backyards of our neighborhood, but the police finally caught him around midnight. I used to be a grocery store manager. Seizure, heart attack and a couple kids who fell out of a cart on fire, head or broken arm. Oh, and one time a drunk guy drove into my friend's car that was parked in the street in front of my house doing like 50 miles per hour. Called 999 in the UK once. The couple who lived in the flat downstairs from us used to argue and fight all the time. We were used to it. But not like this day. It started out with the shouting and screaming we were used to. But it quickly escalated to hearing her being beaten from one end of the flat to the other, and the screams became pain rather than rage. Then he must have picked something heavy up and thrown it at her. It fortunately missed and shattered one of their windows out into the back court where some kids were playing. It was loud enough that the operator caught it. The girl moved back to her parents that day. But as far as I know, no further action was taken. He moved out and a new family moved into that flat soon after. We moved a year later. But only a short distance away. 3 months after we moved, a fire broke out in the circuit breaker cupboard in that same flat. It turned out that the abuser had bridged his electricity meter to try and defraud the electricity supplier. It hadn't been well done. And the whole thing was a ticking time bomb. No one in the flat was hurt. But one of the upstairs neighbors hurt her back from having to drop out of an upper floor window because by the time she woke up, the close was impassable. I was glad to be rid of that guy. He was an all-round scumbag. 999 for me. A drug addict burst into my house wearing nothing but his underpants. He was ranting like a madman. I ran at him and hit him so hard he flew back out through the door. I slammed the door shut, locked it and called the police. Had to call once. Random 64th degree day in February one year and I decided to take a bike ride. As I was riding past a house I heard a woman crying for help. She was older and had slipped on the ice in her driveway. I tried to get her up. But I was 14 and she was bigger. I called 911 and they got her to the hospital. Turns out she had slipped hours before and was on the verge of hypothermia. Found my father dead in his house. I've called twice this year. Once because my now ex-girlfriend threw a rock through my window. A couple months later I accidentally left my door unlocked and some random people came in to rob me but ended up shooting me and fleeing. The same officer responded to both incidents. I've now moved out of that place. Found my mom dead. Since I have a childlike voice, the poor guy receiving the call thought I was a child, so the paramedics were prepared to find a child with their dead mother. They were shocked I was an adult. I don't really remember what I said to the guy, but I do remember apologizing for having a total panic attack while trying to tell him my address. I felt bad for stumbling over my words. I later realized how crazy that was. I'm a home health nurse, so I call out a lot. But this one is the most recent and most impacting on me. On the 15th I called 911 on my hospice patient's wife. She was so weak she could not stand. She was shaking. O2 was 84. Resps were 37. She was COVID positive. It's my most crazy because she was lucid. And she could refuse transport. To get her to go, I promised her I would take care of her spouse until she came home. She was placed on event Sunday the 18th. Her sons decided to withdraw care last night. And she passed at 1:10 this morning. I have gone to my patient's home 3 times a day for the last 16 days. And will continue until he transitions. This whole time renting a house I always claimed someone has to break glass if they want to enter one night just as we were falling asleep. Maybe 2 AM. I just hear a loud bang and glass shatter. I grab my shotgun and yell get out of here in probably the most demonic guttural yell I can muster, half terrified half ready to kill this motherfucker who came into my land. Told my wife to call 911 while I pretended to be brave. On further investigation the heavy bathroom mirror fell off the wall into our bathroom window, shattering it. I was in my apartment one night when I heard people shooting right outside my window. I immediately called the police and set up a camera to maybe catch something. The camera ran for 8 hours. I stayed up for another 3 before sleeping in another room. In the morning I checked the camera. No cops showed up. There could have been some poor person in that back alley bleeding to death and no one came for them. 2. So this older gas station attendant was murdered by these 3 people. The local news showed the picture of them clearly. The next day, not 24 hours later, I went to a casino with my grandmother for the buffet. And who should be hanging out at the main entrance? The 3 murderers. Same clothes and everything, and we were just a few blocks away from where it happened. I immediately called 911. They told me to call the homicide department. I did. I got a freaking machine telling me that homicide closes at 4 PM. So I call 911 again and say that they need to get someone there because these 3 people are going to get away. Nothing. They didn't send anyone. They didn't do anything. They didn't care. I only hope that the family of the poor gas station attendant somehow got justice or closure. Because the police certainly didn't provide it. My roommate at the time threatened to kill me and was driving to our apartment while telling me that on the phone. The officer arrived. Was racist and just generally mean to me and my ex. And then very polite to the roommate who threatened us. The roommate was later jailed for strangling his girlfriend. Me and my friend were walking our dogs in a small park in our town and we found some guy hanging on the rope from a tree. I will probably never forget that moment. When I was 13, my 80-year-old neighbor, Emma Dunn, fell down from a stroke in front of my house. I called for an amphibious plane crash I witnessed. Gunfire down the street. A rollover MVA. Myself for a possible heart attack. Was stopped at a red light. Guy runs up to my window, which was rolled down, and says he needs a ride there after him. Blood running down his face and all over his shirt. Most definitely on something. I looked down so see him holding a large kitchen knife. Rolled my window up and peaced out. He ran off towards a school. Pulled over a couple blocks away to call the cops. Didn't want to hear about someone getting stabbed. Found a girl passed out on a sidewalk outside of a bar. People inside only came out as an ambulance was arriving. A girl tried to grab her and get her up. Saying, "Come on Ashley. This isn't your first rodeo." 1. My father cut off 2 of his fingers with a saw. On my birthday too, mother had a suture open up after a surgery in her mouth. She nearly bled out in the ambulance. Thankfully both made it. Had a car cross the median and slam into a semi on the interstate right in front of us. I've called twice. But they were in the same day. Different incidents. Riding shotgun on the interstate when wildfire danger was high. Saw an electric fence catch a tree branch on fire. On a portion of the road surrounded by forest. Called it in so the FD could bat it down before it got bad. Told them the mile marker number and they took it from there. 200 miles later fog got dense. Visibility got less than 30 feet. An overturned fuel tanker came into view. Covering the left 4 lanes. Driver swerved to get to the rightmost. Only clear lane. A car in the 2 left lanes would have plowed into it. But we made it. More cars were coming. So we called that in 2. Figured every minute it didn't get tended to was 4 or 5 cars in the pileup. Always been too scared to check and see what happened. I was working in the warehouse at my job one day and heard a weird moaning grunting sound coming from outside. Couldn't see anything for a minute and then looked across the street and saw a lady on ground who was making that noise, but nobody else was around. I walked across the street and discovered she was bleeding from her head heavily. I booked it back to the office. Ran in and screamed bitch across the street, bleeding out her freaking head to the mostly female office staff. Wasn't a great moment for me, but I was like 16 and that was the most gore I'd seen IRL at that point, and called 911. What happened was seriously one of the dumbest things ever, but she was walking in their warehouse space and someone was carrying a piece of lumber and did the classic turn and knocked her in the head way hard. I'll say this. Ain't nothing slapstick about the sound that lady was making, that's for sure.
Hi there. Look, if you enjoyed the video, well, why not go ahead and hit that like and subscribe to Reddit Stories. In fact, if you want to see even more responses to this thread, well then, take a look. There's the link in the description below. And remember, show some love to those authors while you're there. And I look forward to seeing you next time.